Hey guys, tonight we drift into the shimmering world of invisibility. Not movie-style wizard cloaks or superhero gadgets, but the gritty, awkward, and sometimes hilarious military attempts to make real soldiers disappear. Picture this. You're standing on a desert range at twilight. The air hums with generators, moths flicker in the floodlights, and a few soldiers step out in front of you. One moves behind a strange, boxy screen, and suddenly, poof, he seems to vanish. Not completely, of course. His outline wobbles, the air shimmers like heat off asphalt, and if you squint, you can still catch the shadow of boots poking out. Still, in that moment, you realize you're staring at the closest thing humans have to invisibility. You probably won't survive if you try this trick in real combat. A shimmering outline won't stop bullets. But the audacity, the sheer creativity of trying to erase human bodies from sight is worth exploring. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge deeper into this desert range, hearing the crunch of gravel under boots. Around you, engineers in rumpled fatigues mutter about refractive indexes and heat signatures. They're trying to make soldiers vanish not just from human eyes, but also from cameras, scopes, and drones. One researcher holds up a sheet that ripples like a mirage. It's not magic. It's carefully arranged layers of transparent materials that bend light just enough to blur a figure. The result looks less like Harry Potter and more like a poor man's Photoshop glitch come to life. Still, the crowd gasps. For centuries, armies have painted, wrapped, and disguised their fighters to trick enemies. What you're watching is the latest echo of a very old urge, from prehistoric hunters daubing themselves in mud to medieval knights hiding behind painted shields. The dream has always been the same. Don't see me, at least not until it's too late. A mainstream historical fact slips in here. During World War I, the French army actually hired artists to paint fake landscapes on canvas screens to conceal gun batteries. That was over a century ago, and soldiers then were just as dazzled as you are now, watching art blur into battlefield science. But here's a quirky tidbit. In the 1960s, Canadian soldiers once experimented with spraying snow camouflage paint directly onto tanks using fire hoses. It looked effective, until the tanks fired up and melted half the paint off. Invisibility often turns out less genius breakthrough and more prank gone wrong. Historians still argue whether the military obsession with invisibility has been more about psychological comfort than battlefield advantage. If an enemy even suspects you might be hidden, that paranoia could slow them down, drain their focus, or make them second-guess every shadow. Sometimes the illusion itself is the weapon. Back on the desert range, you notice how silence stretches after each demonstration. One soldier sidesteps behind the panel, vanishes halfway, then stumbles into view when a breeze knocks it over. Another dons a bulky suit made of reflective shards, looking like a disco ball got drafted. Under harsh lights it's obvious, but under starlight it almost blends with the horizon. Almost. The line between success and failure feels razor thin. And that's where the humour sneaks in. Imagine trying to sprint in one of these clunky outfits. By the time you fumble through the straps, the battle would be long over. You'd be less elite invisible commando and a more human shopping bag rustling in the wind. Still, the researchers keep tweaking, keep layering materials, keep tinkering with the dream. As you walk away, the desert night deepens. Coyotes howl. A warm gust of air slides past your neck, and the horizon glows faintly with distant base lights. That first shimmering test lingers in your memory. Imperfect, yes, but undeniably mesmerizing. It reminds you that invisibility is not a single invention waiting to be cracked. It's a moving target, always just a step ahead, shaped as much by myth as by physics. You tuck that thought away. Ahead lies the rest of the story. How nature first wrote the book on vanishing acts, how humans copied it with burlap and paint, and how armies keep fumbling toward the impossible, and maybe, just maybe, why our fascination with being unseen says more about us than it ever will about science. You wake the next morning still thinking about that shimmering desert test, and now your mind drifts toward creatures who crack the invisibility code long before humans even stood upright. You trudge across an imagined shoreline, damp sand sticking to your boots, and suddenly the beach seems to ripple. A rock shifts, and no, not a rock at all, it's an octopus, melting from barnacled grey to speckled tan as if repainting itself in real time. That's your first lesson. Nature is the real camouflage professor. Octopuses are masters of adaptive coloration. Their skin bristles with chromatophores, tiny sacs of pigment that expand or contract, painting them in instant mosaics. Imagine if your hoodie could do that every time you walked past a different wallpaper. Scientists have measured these changes in milliseconds. That means by the time you blink, the octopus has already checked your outfit, judged it tacky, and blended itself into the background like a polite exit at a boring party. Here's your mainstream fact. The snowshoe hare of North America turns from brown in summer to white in winter, a seasonal shift that's not cosmetic but survival. Those who lag in molting often get picked off by predators. Historians still argue whether climate change is already breaking this cycle, leaving some hares in wrong-coloured coats that betray them in melting snow. Now, a quirky tidbit. Some leaf insects don't just look like leaves, they fake the damage to us. 2. Tiny holes in their wings mimic insect bites, like stage makeup applied with absurd attention to detail. One researcher once joked that leaf insects put Hollywood prop departments to shame. As you crouch in that imaginary forest, you notice how invisibility here isn't about perfection. The octopus still casts a shadow, the hare still leaves tracks, the insect still trembles in the wind. But good camouflage doesn't need to erase you. It just needs to buy a heartbeat of hesitation in your enemy. A hawk swoops, pauses, wonders if that white lump is snow or prey. That moment is the difference between escape and claws. Military thinkers obsessed over these lessons. You picture generals in stuffy rooms, staring at sketches of moths and frogs, muttering about mimicking adaptive concealment. Soldiers were instructed to smear mud, rub charcoal, even weave branches into their helmets. The logic was simple. If nature could teach it, humans could steal it. But you chuckle at the limits. You can't just hand a soldier an octopus and tell him to wear it as a hat. Instead, engineers studied the biology and began dreaming of fabrics that shift colours, fibres that shine or dull with light. You tug at your own sleeve, imagining it rippling into bark pattern, then stone, then shadow. Sounds futuristic, but it's simply humans begging to be as clever as a mollusk. In your sleepy march through this thought experiment, you catch yourself smiling. Isn't it funny that billion-dollar defense budgets are, in essence, trying to imitate bugs and bunnies? Remember that shimmering desert panel? At heart, it's no different from the hare's coat, an awkward, human attempt to match what nature made seamless. Scholars still argue whether copying nature can ever truly work. Machines and fabrics don't molt or breathe, and they always betray themselves somehow, by heat, by sound, by an odd reflection. Yet the pursuit goes on, because just like the octopus, humans crave that heartbeat of invisibility, that moment when eyes slide past and danger drifts away. The forest darkens around you, leaves brushing your shoulders, and somewhere in the canopy an owl blinks down, disappointed at your vanishing act. You keep walking, soft-footed now, trying to think like prey. Ahead, the trail opens to a damp, heathered hillside, where shaggy figures hunker in suits that look like compost heaps. Time to see how humans took nature's lessons and turned them into ragged cloth. You slog uphill now, your boots sinking into boggy heather, mist curling low across the moor, the air smells of wet peat, sheep dung and gun oil. At first glance, the hill seems deserted. Then a shape twitches, just a patch of scrubby grass, right? But as you stare harder, that tuft rises, exhales, and levels a rifle. You've just locked eyes with the birth of the ghillie suit, one of the strangest uniforms ever to crawl across a battlefield. The ghillie suit wasn't dreamed up by scientists in lab coats or generals with chalkboards. No. It came from Scottish gamekeepers in the 19th century, hired to protect estates from poachers. These men, called ghillies, spent their lives stalking silently through the Highlands. They draped themselves in rags, burlap and shredded sacking, letting moss, leaves and mud cling naturally. To a poacher's eye, the ghillie wasn't a man at all, just another mound of bracken. Mainstream fact, during World War I, the British Army's Lovat Scouts adopted the ghillie concept for sharpshooters. They were so effective at vanishing into landscapes that other units nicknamed them the Eyes of the Army. Some historians still argue whether their success was due more to skill or disguise. After all, a bad sniper wrapped in burlap is still just a bad sniper. Quirky tidbit. Early ghillie suits were so heavy and flammable that soldiers sometimes set themselves alight while crouching near campfires. Imagine training all day to become invisible, only to suddenly resemble a screaming bonfire. Not exactly stealthy. You crouch down now, brushing the fabric of one of these suits. It's scratchy, damp, and smells like mildew. The ghillie suit doesn't make you comfortable. It makes you unrecognizable. You shuffle forward belly down, face pressed into the moss, and realize you've become a slow-moving bush. From a few yards away, even your friends would walk past without seeing you. Of course, your dignity goes out the window. You're covered in mud, bugs, and God knows what else. Soldiers used to joke that ghillie suits made you invisible to enemies but irresistible to ticks. As the mist thickens, you imagine how unsettling this must have been for those on the receiving end. A quiet hillside, nothing moving. Then suddenly, crack, a shot from nowhere. Was it the clump of grass, the log, the shadow by the boulder? That uncertainty was the real weapon. Camouflage doesn't need to be perfect. It just has to leave doubt gnawing at your nerves. You crawl farther, the moor falling away into memory. The ground seems to shift beneath you, turning into a deck of steel. The smell of peat fades, replaced by salt spray and engine grease. Around you loom hulking warships painted in bizarre zigzag patterns. Stripes, cubes, and diagonals swirl like an abstract painting gone rogue. Here, invisibility doesn't mean blending in, it means dazzling the eye into confusion. You can't help grinning. From burlap bushes to cubist battleships, the human urge to vanish was already mutating into something stranger. You run your hand along a painted hull and wonder how many sailors felt proud or ridiculous in their floating optical illusions. The ocean wind stings your face. Somewhere behind you, a ghillie rustles quietly into the heather. Ahead, the painted ships creak in the tide, waiting to trick the next submarine periscope. The road from scruffy moors to dazzle seas is only beginning. You steady yourself against the rail of a battleship, gulls wheeling above, salt air clinging to your lips. The hull beneath your hand is not the dull grey you expect, but a carnival of stripes, zigzags, and cubist angles. This is dazzle camouflage, a World War I experiment so bold and eccentric that sailors must have felt like they were crewing floating art installations. You squint down the length of the ship, and the lines fracture your depth perception. It's not invisible, but your eyes can't quite tell where the bow begins or how fast the vessel moves. That was the point. Mainstream fact. Dazzle camouflage was the brainchild of Norman Wilkinson, a British artist and naval officer. rather than hide ships. His idea was to confuse German U-boat commanders peering through periscopes. Submarines had to judge speed and heading precisely to launch torpedoes. If the angles on the hull tricked their calculations by even a few degrees, the torpedo might miss entirely. Historians still argue whether Dazzle saved ships or merely gave sailors seasick headaches from staring at the patterns. You shuffle across the deck, tracing a line of paint that bends abruptly, leading nowhere. The ship feels alive with optical illusions, like a moving funhouse. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some sailors swore the dazzle patterns made them feel queasy during long voyages, as if the very ship they were standing on kept tilting. Imagine trying to eat dinner while your own hull gives you vertigo. As the sun dips low, you watch other vessels slip across the horizon, each one painted differently. No two dazzle patterns were alike, making every ship a custom puzzle. From a distance, the sea looks like an art gallery curated by Picasso. Each battleship a rolling canvas. A periscope operator would see a fractured mess of angles, unable to line up a clear shot. It wasn't invisibility, but it was misdirection, a stage magician's trick at industrial scale. Of course, there were skeptics. Many naval officers thought it looked ridiculous. Some claimed it made their ships more noticeable, not less. And there was no easy way to measure success. If a torpedo missed, was it because of dazzle, bad aim, or just luck? Historians still debate whether the technique truly reduced sinkings, or whether it mostly boosted morale. After all, it's comforting to believe your ship wears a magical shield of paint. You lean over the side and watch waves fracture into black and white stripes reflected off the hull. The ocean itself seems patterned now, as if the dazzle is spreading. It's strangely mesmerizing, and you can imagine bored sailors staring at the designs during long nights, tracing lines that lead nowhere. One soldier once joked that if the dazzle didn't fool the Germans, it might at least hypnotize the crew into a nap. But underneath the whimsy lies a serious truth. Humans realized invisibility could also mean confusion, not disappearance. You don't need to vanish if you can make the enemy doubt their own eyes. That idea, tricking perception rather than erasing presence, would ripple through every later attempt at military stealth. The engines thrum beneath your feet, and the painted giant glides into darkness. In your mind's eye, the dazzle stripes smear into shadow until the warship itself dissolves into memory. Out of the mist ahead rises something stranger still. An army that fights with rubber tanks, cardboard planes, and speakers blasting fake battalions. If dazzle ships were moving art, this next chapter is full-on theatre. You step forward, ready to join the audience of one of the most surreal acts of deception in military history. You walk off the pier and find yourself on a meadow that hums with activity, but something feels wrong. Tanks loom in rows, aircraft sit with wings tilted just so, and the low rumble of engines rolls across the grass. Yet as you step closer, the illusion collapses. A soldier flicks a cigarette, leans against a tank, and it wobbles like a balloon. Another kicks the wheel of a truck and it bounces like a beach ball. Welcome to the Ghost Army, where entire divisions existed mostly out of air, paint, and sound effects. Mainstream fact, the U.S. Ghost Army in World War II was officially the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, a top-secret unit tasked with deception. They were made up not only of soldiers but also artists, set designers, and sound engineers. Their job? Convince German scouts that an entire armoured division was camped in one place while the real army prepared elsewhere. Inflatable tanks, rubber artillery, and fake radio chatter turned empty fields into buzzing encampments. Historians still argue whether their operations directly shortened the war or simply confused German commanders enough to buy precious time. You stroll among these rubber beasts, pressing a hand into the cool vinyl. The tank wheezes faintly, like a deflating pool toy. Imagine being the unlucky soldier assigned to guard a balloon with a machine gun perched on top. Talk about the most awkward game of don't let it pop. Here's a quirky tidbit. One Ghost Army unit once rigged up loudspeakers blasting the sound of trucks, tanks, and shouting soldiers at volumes so high they could be heard 15 miles away. Locals swore they heard a full army marching past, when in reality, the only things moving were vinyl tanks shivering in the wind. As you wander through the encampment, you notice details that make the illusion work. Tyre tracks carefully pressed into dirt, laundry lines strung with fake uniforms, even smoke pots releasing the smell of diesel fuel. Soldiers in the Ghost Army joked they were part of the biggest art project in history. Imagine a squad of painters with brushes tucked into helmets, staging Battlefield Broadway. But the stakes were deadly serious. If German scouts realised the deception, these artists could be annihilated. No camouflage suit would save them. Yet their courage was in performance, making noise, being seen, and drawing fire away from real troops. It's invisibility by misdirection, the same principle as dazzle ships but played out across landscapes. You picture a general scanning the horizon with binoculars, noting the armoured division bristling below. He radios his commanders to adjust plans, never realising that the fearsome tanks are little more than stitched fabric. That single decision could alter an entire battle. As the night falls, you lie on the meadow, staring at moonlight shimmering off vinyl. Somewhere, soldiers roll up another inflatable, stuffing a whole tank into the back of a truck like it's camping gear. A strange mix of humour and awe washes over you. The Ghost Army didn't just try to make things invisible, they conjured shadows out of nothing. The meadow fades, and your ears fill with a softer sound, the crunch of boots on snow. The air grows colder, your breath fogging white in front of you. Now the test is not balloons or dazzle paint, but the most ancient camouflage of all, winter itself. White coats, muffled rifles, and soldiers who move like ghosts across the snowfields. Your breath steams in front of you now, curling like smoke before fading into the pale night. The meadow of vinyl tanks is gone, and you stand ankle-deep in snow that crunches sharply under your boots. The silence is heavy, almost holy, broken only by the faint whistle of wind threading through pine branches. Somewhere ahead, a line of figures glides across the whiteness. For a moment, they look like drifting shadows. Then you realise it's a unit of soldiers in snow camouflage, wrapped head to toe in white oversuits. Even their rifles wear snowy sleeves. Mainstream fact: winter camouflage has been standard since World War II. Finnish troops, for example, famously wore all-white gear during the Winter War of 1939-40. They moved swiftly on skis, striking Soviet positions and vanishing back into the trees. Their ability to disappear into snowdrifts earned them the nickname the White Death. Historians still argue whether it was their camouflage or sheer familiarity with the landscape that made them so lethal. You kneel, tugging at a snow overjacket. It's light, cottony, and almost fragile. The trick isn't just the whiteness, but the silence. Every buckle wrapped, every strap tied down, no metal to clink. Soldiers even stuffed cloth into rifle bolts to keep them from snapping loudly in the cold. A quirky tidbit here. Some armies issued white mittens with a black dot stitched into the palm, so soldiers could signal to each other without raising hands like giant waving snowmen. The men ahead drop into the snow, barely leaving ripples. You follow, pressing yourself flat, feeling the icy crust bite through fabric. It's not invisibility in the shimmering sci-fi sense, it's erasure by monotony. In a white world, the only sin is to move too fast. So you practice. Slide a boot an inch. Pause. Exhale. Even your breath feels like a flare against the night sky, a ghostly beacon you wish you could snuff out. Soldiers sometimes chewed snow to cool their mouths, so their breath wouldn't steam visibly. It's the most uncomfortable breath mint you'll ever imagine. The discipline is brutal. No coughing, no stamping your frozen feet. One creak of ice and the illusion collapses. Camouflage here is as much about patience as clothing. You realize invisibility isn't just external, it's internal, a test of stillness. As the moon arcs higher, shadows stretch across the white expanse. You imagine being on the receiving end, scanning with binoculars, seeing only snowdrifts, and then suddenly hearing gunfire erupt from nowhere. Was that drift a hill, or a squad lying prone? Doubt gnaws again, just like it did with ghillie suits and dazzle hulls. Yet snow has its quirks, too. Tracks betray even the best disguise. Finnish patrols learn to brush away their ski marks with pine boughs, but in fresh powder, every movement leaves scars. There are stories of Soviet scouts following silent ski patrols by simply tracing their neat trails through the forest. Camouflage may hide you in stillness, but the ground tattles behind you. You push onward, your face numb, eyelashes rimed with frost. A soldier passes you, his face wrapped in white gauze so only his eyes gleam. He looks more ghost than man, a whisper in the snow. There's an eerie beauty in it, men becoming part of the frozen landscape. Neither alive nor dead, just lingering in the space between visibility and myth. But as you trudge farther, the whiteness blurs. The snowfields dissolve into rows of uniforms hanging in a warehouse. Fabric dyed in every shade of green, brown, and sand. Some patterns seem sharp and effective, others look oddly cartoonish, as though the designers had never stepped outside. These are the pattern wars, and not every design turned soldiers invisible. Some, hilariously, made them easier to spot. You stand now in a cavernous warehouse, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air tinged with the smell of canvas and dye. Racks upon racks of uniforms hang around you, each one promising invisibility, or at least trying to. You run your hand over a sleeve patterned with green blotches, then another with pixelated squares. This is the world of camouflage patterns, where armies play dress-up with science, fashion, and sometimes outright delusion. Mainstream fact: the United States famously rolled out its Universal Camouflage Pattern, UCP, in 2004, meant to work in deserts, forests, and urban environments. The result? It worked poorly everywhere. Soldiers joked it was the see me pattern, since its greyish tone stood out against sand, rock, and woodland alike. Historians still argue whether its adoption was the result of bureaucratic haste, political lobbying, or simply misplaced faith in digital aesthetics. You tug one of the jackets closer and squint at the tiny pixel squares. The idea was to break up the human outline at a distance, like early digital TV static. But in practice, the pixels didn't mimic nature. They just made soldiers look like walking Minecraft characters. A quirky tidbit: during testing, some commanders insisted the pattern looked futuristic, which may have outweighed whether it actually worked. Form lost to fashion, proving even camouflage isn't immune to trends. As you wander between racks, you notice how patterns mirror their eras. Jungle fatigues of Vietnam, with bold green and black swirls, look almost psychedelic, like someone spilled paint in a swamp. Desert camo, with sandy browns, reflects wars fought under harsh suns. Each fabric whispers not just hide me, but this is where we expected to fight. You slip into one of the jackets, feeling its stiff fabric crease at your elbows. The mirror nearby shows you as a patchy ghost. At a glance, maybe you'd blend into a scrubby hillside, but under fluorescent lights, you look like a bored guy loitering in a camping store. Camouflage depends as much on setting as design, and the warehouse proves the point brutally. Historians still argue whether camouflage research is truly scientific or more of an art. Vision science tells us about contrast, outlines, and colour blending. But the battlefield is messy. Mud, dust, lighting, even enemy expectations all twist the rules. A pattern perfect on paper can flop in the field. Remember those Finnish mittens with black dots? Practical in snowdrifts, laughable in jungles. The line between genius and blunder is razor thin. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine being a soldier told your brand new high-tech uniform makes you more visible. Some veterans did exactly that, sewing scraps of local cloth onto their official gear, customizing their invisibility like DIY fashionistas. In the end, the best camouflage might just be creativity. As you hang the jacket back on the rack, you notice a different section. Experimental fabrics, glossy and strange, designed not for blending into forests but for dodging thermal cameras. The fluorescent buzz fades, replaced by a low electronic hum. The air feels warmer, and suddenly you're not thinking about colour at all, you're thinking about heat. Ahead lies the strange science of hiding from the invisible eyes of infrared. The warehouse dissolves into darkness, and now you stand in a testing field ringed by tripods and humming cameras. A soldier walks across the range in ordinary fatigues, glowing bright on the thermal display like a human-shaped torch. Then another steps out draped in silvery foil sheets, and suddenly the heat signature blurs into the background. You've entered the world of thermal camouflage, where the challenge isn't sight but warmth itself. Mainstream fact: infrared detection became widespread during the Cold War, giving armies the ability to see soldiers and vehicles at night based on heat. That advantage forced researchers to devise countermeasures, insulating fabrics, cooling packs, and reflective layers to reduce thermal contrast. Historians still argue whether the earliest foil blankets were practical on battlefields or just clumsy prototypes better suited for camping trips. You reach out to touch one of those foil sheets, and it crinkles under your hand like a giant potato chip bag. The idea is simple: trap or deflect heat so sensors don't register a bright outline. But of course, there's a quirky tidbit here. Early tests showed soldiers wrapped in foil sweated so profusely that their suits sometimes became hotter than if they'd worn nothing. Picture a human baked potato slowly roasting inside its own camouflage. A soldier demonstrates another trick, standing behind a wall with an air gap, so heat doesn't transfer directly. Even a sheet of plywood with insulation can break the thermal silhouette. You watch as he steps in and out of cover, glowing bright one moment, melting into the background the next. It feels like hide and seek with invisible eyes, each move a gamble against technology. You shuffle closer to one display showing a rifle barrel glowing after a few shots. The gun's heat betrays the shooter, even if the person stays hidden. Researchers tried wrapping weapons in special sleeves, but then barrels overheated faster. It's the old camouflage curse: fix one problem, create another. Historians still argue whether thermal camouflage is about truly defeating sensors or simply delaying detection. Even a few seconds of confusion can let a soldier reposition, escape, or launch an ambush. Remember the ghostly patience of those snow-suited soldiers? Thermal camouflage is another extension of that heartbeat of hesitation. The moment the enemy wonders if the screen is faulty or if they really did miss something. You can't help but smile imagining the absurdities. One unit reportedly tested cooling packs strapped under uniforms, turning soldiers into walking refrigerators. The packs leaked, of course, so the invisible squad squelched across fields smelling faintly of freezer burn. Not exactly stealthy. As you wander between the glowing figures on the monitors, the edges of the scene blur. The field fades into moonlit lanes, where soldiers creep through ruined streets with night vision scopes glowing green on their helmets. You realize the contest isn't just hiding heat. It's a duel of light itself. Every advance in vision spawns a counter, and the night becomes a chessboard of illumination. The ruined streets stretch before you like a maze, cobblestones littered with broken glass that crunch softly beneath your boots. Lanterns are gone, torches long extinct. Instead, the night belongs to glowing lenses strapped across soldiers' faces. Night vision goggles, casting everything into eerie green. You blink, and suddenly you're looking through their eyes. Buildings glow like stage sets. Shadows deepen into black voids, and every faint glimmer becomes magnified into blinding streaks. Mainstream fact: The first widespread military night vision devices appeared during World War II, clunky and mounted on rifles, powered by backpack-sized batteries. By the Vietnam era, lighter goggles let soldiers move freely through darkness, turning night into something exploitable rather than feared. Historians still argue whether this tech shifted strategy more than any other invention of the late 20th century. Some claim it transformed combat by making ambushes obsolete. Others insist terrain and training mattered just as much. But here's the quirky twist. Early night vision gear made soldiers look like they were cosplaying as giant insects, with lenses so oversized they resembled alien eyes. Troops nicknamed them green weenies, which is perhaps not the most heroic of titles. You'd laugh if you saw a platoon of them fumbling through the jungle, tripping over vines while supposedly possessing superhuman vision. Still, the effect was staggering. Imagine being on one side of a battlefield, blind in the dark, while the other side moved like ghosts, watching you stumble. Invisible, not by cloak or foil, but by advantage. The phrase, "owning the night," wasn't just a slogan, it was doctrine. You watch a squad slip down an alley, perfectly coordinated, every hand signal glowing faintly green. They are phantoms. Of course, invisibility always works both ways. To counter night vision, opposing forces experimented with simple tricks, floodlights, flares, or even reflective paint to blind the lenses. One particularly ridiculous idea: cows painted with phosphorescent stripes to lure soldiers into ambushes. Historians still argue whether that story was a serious plan or just the sort of barracks myth that spreads faster than rations. Either way, the image of glowing cows wandering through a battlefield is oddly comforting. You pause in a shattered archway, listening. The city is quiet, too quiet, until you notice a red glow creeping through your borrowed goggles. It's a laser, dancing faintly across walls, guiding the green-lit soldiers like breadcrumbs. Here's another joke hiding in the shadows. As much as night vision made soldiers invisible, it also gave them away if you knew where to look. The faint whir of the goggles, the odd shimmer on glass, even the distinctive head tilt of someone moving without a flashlight. No invisibility trick is flawless. And then, like a slide dissolving in a lecture hall, the vision shifts. You're no longer in crumbling streets but in a jungle clearing where frogs croak louder than gunfire. Soldiers crouch in foliage, goggles glowing. One man raises his hand, and for a split second you see what the enemy would. Nothing but a shifting shadow where men should be. The forest seems alive, its canopy trembling, leaves glistening in humid moonlight. You understand the irony. Night vision made soldiers see everything, yet it also demanded total discipline. Move wrong, breathe too loud, and you give yourself away. Invisibility is less about technology than patience. You lean back, letting the jungle dissolve into quiet darkness. The green glow fades, replaced by shadows deeper than velvet. For a moment, you can't tell whether you're invisible or simply swallowed by night. The jungle fades away, and now you stand in a chamber that feels both futuristic and strangely theatrical. Lights dim, and then a soldier walks forward in a shimmering suit that bends and twists the air around him. You rub your eyes, but no, it isn't just your imagination. His outline wavers like heat haze above asphalt, and then, with a slight turn, he almost vanishes. This is the realm of optical illusion cloaks, the kind of science that feels like it crawled out of a comic book. Mainstream fact: by the early 2000s, militaries and universities alike were experimenting with metamaterials, engineered substances that could bend light waves in unusual ways. The hope was that, just as radar could be tricked, visible light could be redirected around objects, making them disappear. Historians still argue whether these prototypes truly achieved invisibility or were merely elaborate camouflage that worked under tightly controlled conditions. The suit before you seems alive, Tiny projectors stitched into the fabric display real-time images of the environment behind the wearer, like a walking movie screen. When he moves, there's a half-second lag, a flicker that gives him away. But stand still, and he becomes a ghost. You catch yourself holding your breath, half expecting him to step straight through you. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some early cloaking demonstrations were more theatrical trickery than hard science. Engineers showed off cloaks in auditoriums where lighting was precisely arranged. But if you looked from the wrong angle, you saw everything. Think less Harry Potter and more stage magician with a very expensive prop budget. In fact, one research group joked their cloak worked perfectly, as long as your enemy agrees to stand exactly where we want them to. Still, the promise is intoxicating. Imagine a tank rolling across a field, its surface shimmering with projected grass and sky, blending so perfectly that drones overhead see only empty terrain. Or a squad slipping through urban alleys, their suits painted with flickering graffiti that makes them part of the walls. It feels absurd, but so did flying machines once upon a time. You crouch near a rack of lenses used for testing. When light bends through them, it creates the illusion of empty space where an object sits. Reach out your hand, and it seems to vanish halfway, like a magician's trick gone wrong. The sensation makes your stomach flutter, as though the universe itself is being gently hacked. Historians still argue whether invisibility cloaks represent the pinnacle of camouflage, or a distraction from simpler, more reliable methods. After all, a muddy poncho has never run out of batteries, while a high-tech cloak might sputter out mid-mission, leaving its wearer glowing like a neon sign. You chuckle softly at another story. In one demonstration, a researcher cloaked his cat using reflective panels. The animal, unimpressed, promptly sat down and refused to move, breaking the illusion entirely. So much for the future of warfare hinging on feline cooperation. The soldier in the suit fades, flickers, then becomes visible again, pulling the hood back with a sheepish grin. The room brightens, and the illusion collapses into simple fabric dotted with wires. You realize invisibility isn't about perfection, it's about hesitation. If your enemy sees you half a second too late, you've already won. And as you step away from the suit, the chamber walls dissolve into an entirely different glow, not visible light this time, but the cold sweep of a radar screen, invisible to the eye. Yes, but what about the machines that see differently? The contest of detection has only just shifted to a new arena. The shimmer of the optical cloak fades, and suddenly you're staring at a spinning radar dish, its sweep cutting through the night with invisible waves. A soft ping, ping, echoes in your ears, as if the air itself is pulsing with hidden vision. You realize that the quest for invisibility wasn't just about tricking human eyes. It was about outsmarting the machines watching from beyond the horizon. Mainstream fact, radar, first used extensively in World War II, gave militaries the ability to detect planes, ships, and even storms far away. By bouncing radio waves off objects, it revealed what was supposed to be hidden by darkness, clouds, or distance. Historians still argue whether the development of radar changed warfare more than the atomic bomb, because it made surprise attacks nearly impossible. To counter it, engineers dreamed up stealth, shaping aircraft so radar waves would scatter instead of bouncing back. You run your hand over a model jet nearby, its flat, jagged surfaces reminding you more of origami than aerodynamics. The F-117 Nighthawk, the first operational stealth aircraft, looked less like a fighter jet and more like a polygon come to life. Pilots nicknamed it the Wobblin' Goblin, which is not exactly the title you want for your multi-million-dollar invisibility machine. Here's the quirky bit. Early stealth prototypes were so unstable in flight that without computer assistance, they would have tumbled out of the sky like bricks with wings. Imagine trusting your life to a jet that only behaves because a microchip whispers constant corrections into its nervous system, invisible to radar, yes, but also permanently cranky. You watch as a technician demonstrates radar-absorbing paint. He slaps a thick, tar-like coating onto panels, muttering about how it reduces reflections. You lean in, and the smell is unmistakable, like wet asphalt after rain. Soldiers joked that stealth jets weren't just invisible, they smelled like a freshly paved road. Historians still argue whether stealth technology created true invisibility or merely stacked the odds. Radar operators sometimes reported strange blips they couldn't identify. Were those ghosts on the screen, or stealth planes slipping through? Invisibility, once again, was less about erasure than about sowing hesitation. A monitor flickers, showing a submarine beneath the waves. The radar fades into sonar, another kind of detection. You hear the eerie ping, ping, echo underwater, bouncing off hulls, betraying shapes hidden in the deep. Submarines tried to turn invisible with sound-absorbing coatings, rubber tiles that made them feel less like steel beasts and more like oversized whales. The problem? Sometimes those tiles peeled off mid-mission, floating to the surface like lost bathroom mats. You chuckle at the image of sailors watching their supposedly invisible vessel shedding stealth scales one by one, like a snake embarrassed to molt at the wrong time. And just when you think you've heard enough about clumsy stealth tricks, a technician wheels out a model of the B-2 Spirit bomber, sleek, bat-winged, its surface polished into curves so radar waves slide right past. You step closer, and for a moment, it feels like staring at a shadow given form, a machine designed not to fight but to vanish. The radar dish turns one last time, its sweep slowing until the pings fade into silence. The room around you begins to melt away, walls dissolving into humming circuits and glowing screens. You feel yourself being drawn into the heart of the military's new obsession. Not just radar, but an entire spectrum of invisible vision. If light, heat, and sound could all betray a soldier, then the next battlefield would demand invisibility on every wavelength. The radar dish dissolves, and now you find yourself inside a dimly lit laboratory, the air buzzing with fluorescent tubes and the smell of ozone. Computer screens glow with rippling patterns, infrared, ultraviolet, electromagnetic signatures. You realize you've stepped into the military's next frontier, spectral invisibility. The attempt to vanish not just from eyes or radar, but from every kind of detection humans can invent. Mainstream fact: modern surveillance systems no longer rely on a single sense. Satellites scan heat signatures, drones detect radio transmissions, and sensors can pick up even the faintest electromagnetic hum from electronic devices. Historians still argue whether this ever-expanding surveillance network has made true invisibility impossible, or whether it has only forced science to grow more creative. On one table sits a box covered in black fabric. A technician lifts the cloth, revealing a lump of material that looks utterly ordinary, just a dull, charcoal block. Yet when he places it under the infrared camera, it disappears, blending perfectly into the screen's background. This is metamaterial tuned for heat absorption, swallowing thermal radiation like a cosmic sponge. You lean closer, half expecting it to feel cold, but it's just bland. The ultimate anticlimax of high science. The more boring it looks, the more powerful it might be. Here's the quirky tidbit. In early tests, researchers joked they had created Harry Potter's blanket for lizards, because one experiment cloaked the heat of a small iguana. The lizard, unimpressed, fell asleep mid-demonstration. Invisible or not, nap time waits for no breakthrough. Across the room, another device hums softly. It projects electromagnetic noise, a kind of static camouflage that confuses sensors by making everything look like background radiation. The effect is mesmerizing, like watching a fog roll across a digital landscape. But you notice a flaw. The more powerful the cloak, the more obvious its presence becomes. It's like trying to hide your snoring by blasting white noise. Sure, you can't hear the snores, but now everyone's wondering about the mysterious humming. Historians still argue whether these spectral cloaks will ever be practical in war. Some believe the cost and complexity doom them to remain laboratory curiosities. Others insist that once miniaturized, they'll be standard gear, as ordinary as helmets. You touch another prototype, a flexible panel designed to bend light into ultraviolet frequencies, effectively erasing outlines under certain scanners. In the visible spectrum, it looks like cheap plastic, but under UV lamps, it simply ceases to exist. For a second, your own fingers vanish at the edges, and a chill runs up your arm as if reality itself had hiccuped. Of course, invisibility here comes with comedy too. In one notorious experiment, a cloak designed to hide electromagnetic emissions also blocked cell phone signals inside. Soldiers testing it found themselves cut off from command, and worse, from their playlists. The joke in the lab was that the cloak made you invisible but also doomed you to boredom. You step back, watching the glowing screens cycle through their spectrums: heat, radio waves, ultraviolet, microwave. Each one a new way to be seen, each one a new cloak waiting to be stitched together. The dream of complete invisibility is no longer about a single suit or paint job. It's about vanishing across every layer of reality's invisible fabric. The lights dim. The humming fades. Slowly. The lab around you dissolves into something more organic. The smell of damp soil. The sound of leaves brushing together. You realize you've slipped not into the future, but back into the natural world, where creatures have been practicing invisibility for millions of years without a single grant proposal. The humming computers fade, and suddenly you're kneeling in a forest where moonlight filters through a canopy of shifting leaves. A moth flutters past, its wings patterned to look exactly like tree bark. You blink twice before realizing you almost missed it. Nature has been perfecting invisibility far longer than any military lab, and here, in the hush of the woods, you see how soldiers borrowed tricks from creatures that mastered camouflage through evolution. Mainstream fact: natural camouflage inspired entire branches of military science, from World War I dazzle paint ships to modern ghillie suits modelled after shaggy moss. Historians still argue whether the first camouflage units were artists or soldiers, since armies often recruited painters and designers to study how nature hides itself. You crouch low, brushing your fingers across the mossy ground. The forest floor smells of damp earth and pine sap, and every texture blends into the next. A soldier in a ghillie suit belly crawls nearby, so convincingly cloaked in burlap, netting, and twigs that you swear he's part of the undergrowth. When he shifts, a startled beetle scurries across his sleeve, as if it, too, was fooled. Here's the quirky tidbit. Early camouflage designers borrowed ideas from butterflies and octopuses, sketching how their skins broke up outlines. Soldiers laughed when told to dress like a bush, but soon discovered that when you resemble a shrub, snipers live longer. Somewhere. Darwin probably smirked in his grave. A flicker above draws your gaze. An owl swoops silently, its feather patterns dissolving against the night sky. You can't help but imagine soldiers envying that kind of stealth, the ability to vanish without gadgets, batteries, or metamaterials, just feathers, silence, and patience. Historians still argue whether nature's lessons were taken too literally. Some experts say mimicking animals worked wonders. Others claim the battlefield is too chaotic for such direct copying. Either way, it's hard to deny the inspiration when you see a chameleon shift colours beside you, its skin sliding from green to brown in perfect synchrony with the leaves. You stifle a laugh remembering a story of World War II soldiers camouflaging themselves with horse manure, believing enemy scouts would dismiss them as livestock waste. Practical, maybe, dignified, not so much, but invisibility often demands absurd sacrifices, and sometimes survival trumps pride. The forest deepens, shapes blur into one another. You almost feel yourself blending with the ground, your breathing matching the rhythm of the leaves. it dawns on you that invisibility isn't always about hiding from machines. It's about surrendering your sharp human outline to the messy, forgiving patterns of the world. And as you close your eyes, the forest fades into an entirely different environment. You hear the distant roar of jets overhead, the hum of drones circling like metallic bees. Nature's camouflage is timeless, but the modern battlefield has shifted. Soldiers now walk beneath the unblinking gaze of satellites, and invisibility has taken on yet another stranger form. The forest dissolves, and when you open your eyes again, you're standing on a flat desert plain. The sand glows faintly silver under moonlight, but overhead the real watchers hum, satellites and drones, orbiting and circling, always awake. You feel small beneath their gaze, like a piece on a chessboard that can never slip off the grid. Invisibility here doesn't mean hiding in bushes, it means outsmarting machines that see from miles above. Mainstream fact: modern satellites can detect movement, heat, and even changes in soil patterns caused by footprints or tyre tracks. Drones, meanwhile, hover with cameras and sensors, streaming live surveillance to command centres continents away. Historians still argue whether this era marks the true end of secrecy in war, or whether every surveillance revolution has always been countered by some equally creative trick. You walk past a group of soldiers crouched beside a camouflage net. Up close, it looks like cheap mesh sprinkled with plastic leaves. But viewed from above, its pattern mimics the ground so precisely that even a drone camera sees nothing but desert ripples. One soldier smirks and points at a sand-coloured tarp draped over their vehicle. To you, it looks obvious. But on the drone's feed, the truck disappears into the dunes. Here's the quirky tidbit. In some regions, soldiers smeared mud mixed with crushed candy wrappers onto tarps to create a reflective sparkle, tricking satellites into thinking they were looking at sunlit sand. High-tech invisibility courtesy of the snack aisle. You tilt your head back, staring at the endless black sky. Somewhere up there, cameras the size of small cars are snapping high-resolution photos of every patch of Earth. Yet the irony remains, if you can predict their orbit, you can still hide. Armies have literally scheduled movements for the gaps between satellite passes, marching tanks under cover of timing rather than cloaks. Historians still argue whether drones and satellites have made true invisibility extinct. Some say nothing escapes the eye in the sky anymore. Others argue that deception has simply shifted forms, from camouflage nets to decoy targets, inflatable tanks, and digital tricks that feed false images back into sensors. You chuckle softly at another absurd tale. Troops once inflated hundreds of rubber decoy tanks, complete with fake heat emitters, fooling enemy satellites into thinking an invasion force was massing. It was essentially a giant battlefield prank. Inflatable pool toys masquerading as doom. The desert wind brushes your face, carrying the smell of dust and dry heat. Around you, the sand dunes ripple like waves. For a moment, you realize the desert itself is the best cloak, ever-changing, reshaping its face after every storm. Machines might scan endlessly, but nature's chaos always leaves room for ghosts to slip through. The hum of the drones fades into a different sound, closer, sharper. It's the clatter of keyboards, the faint whir of cooling fans. You blink, and the desert dissolves into the glow of monitors stacked in rows. Soldiers now crouch not in sand or forest, but behind screens, conjuring invisibility in cyberspace, where no tarp or ghillie suit will help you. The desert vanishes, and you find yourself in a dim operations center filled with glowing monitors. Fingers clatter across keyboards, lines of code scroll like cascading rain, and the soft hum of servers fills the air. Here, invisibility has shed its fabric, foil, and paint. Now it lives in cyberspace. Soldiers no longer crouch under nets, they slip behind firewalls and into data streams, trying to become ghosts in the digital world. Mainstream fact: cyber warfare has become a central tool of modern militaries, from disrupting power grids to stealing secrets, all without a single shot fired. Stealth here means malware so well disguised it hides inside ordinary traffic, or a hacker masking their location through layers of rerouted signals. Historians still argue whether cyber invisibility counts as war in the traditional sense, or if it's an entirely new battlefield with its own strange rules. A technician leans back, showing you a visualization of data packets flowing across the globe. Tiny red dots represent attacks, while blue trails show defenses rising like shields. Somewhere in that storm, a hidden actor is moving, masking their presence so thoroughly that by the time detection systems blink awake, the intruder is already gone. Here's the quirky tidbit. One cyber unit once tested disguising malware inside cat videos, knowing that soldiers were more likely to download them than suspicious-looking files. The virus spread not through firepower, but through memes, an oddly adorable cloak for something so destructive. You glance at another screen where AI-generated digital soldiers run decoy operations, spamming fake signals to confuse enemy surveillance. Invisible in one sense, but also absurd when you realize entire battles can now be fought between bots pretending to be humans, pretending to be invisible. Historians still argue whether the greatest strength of cyber stealth is its deniability. A jet can be tracked, a tank can be photographed, but a line of code that can slip through routers, vanish into proxies, and leave leaders shrugging at one another across diplomatic tables, pretending nothing happened. The room hums steadily. Screens glow blue against tired faces. The air smells faintly of coffee and burnt dust from overworked fans. You notice a soldier rubbing his temples, muttering that true invisibility isn't about being unseen, but about being unnoticed. A virus that never trips alarms, a drone that looks like weather, a soldier who blends so well into data noise that no one even thinks to look twice. You chuckle at the irony. After centuries of cloaks, ghillie suits, radar paint, and foil wraps, the ultimate invisibility trick might just be hiding in plain sight, behind the ordinary chaos of information. And then, as the screens dim, the room dissolves around you one final time. You're left with a soft glow, the sound of your own breathing, and the slow realization that the story of invisible soldiers has marched from painted leaves to digital ghosts. One more step remains, though, looking ahead to where these cloaks might take us tomorrow. The hum of servers fades, and suddenly you're standing in a space that feels both vast and empty, as though you've stepped out of history and into speculation itself. The floor beneath you is polished like glass, reflecting stars overhead that aren't quite real. This is tomorrow's battlefield, where invisibility exists more in imagination and prototypes than in proven gear. And yet, you can't help but sense that the seeds are already sown. Mainstream fact: militaries today are investing heavily in artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and quantum sensors, each of which might reshape the way invisibility works. Historians still argue whether these tools will make invisibility impossible, because quantum sensors can theoretically detect even the faintest disturbance, or whether they'll unlock cloaking methods we can barely imagine. Before you, a soldier steps forward in a suit so thin it looks like woven glass. Engineers call it adaptive camouflage. Thousands of microscopic sensors embedded in the fabric read the environment, then project matching patterns in real time. From one angle, he's the desert. From another, he's a city wall. From another, he's just gone. You lean closer and notice the faint shimmer, the tiny flickers that reveal the trick. Invisibility never erases, it only delays recognition. Here's the quirky tidbit. One company tested a cloaking panel on a car, and while it did vanish into the background, the headlights remained glaringly obvious. Invisible body, floating lights, like a ghost sedan cruising the street. Not exactly the terror weapon they'd hoped for. The soldier vanishes again, and in his place floats a drone the size of a sparrow. Its wings buzz softly as it disappears into the rafters. You strain to hear it, but even the sound blends into the murmur of air conditioning. The future of invisibility might not belong to men in suits at all, but to machines so small and quiet they barely exist in your awareness. Historians still argue whether invisibility is even desirable. Some claim it destabilizes war, making ambushes too easy and surveillance pointless. Others insist it's inevitable, because every advance in detection creates an equal hunger for disappearance. You walk slowly across the polished floor, feeling the faint vibration of possibilities beneath your shoes. Around you flicker holograms of past experiments, foil suits, ghillie cloaks, stealth bombers, spectral blocks, all of them imperfect, all of them absurd in their own ways, and yet all of them stepping stones toward this uncertain horizon. The lights dim, the stars overhead soften, and then the narration itself slows, easing you out of the strange tale of soldiers who tried to vanish. The world becomes quieter now. Your breath slows, the rhythm of the story dissolving into a calm, steady hush. Imagine yourself lying down in a quiet room, the air cool, the hum of distant machines softened into a gentle lull. All the cloaks, suits, nets, and screens fade into nothing more than whispers of history. You picture leaves rustling on a forest floor, snow falling across a silent plain, the desert wind brushing dunes into new shapes, nature's invisibility, soft, forgiving, endless. Soldiers, scientists, and dreamers all try to copy it, but here, for you, it simply becomes comfort. A reminder that fading into the background isn't about danger anymore, it's about rest. Each breath you take carries you further from the glow of monitors, further from the hum of radar, further from the shimmer of cloaks. You're no longer seen, no longer tracked, no longer pursued, just stillness, warm and steady, wrapping around you like a blanket. And as your eyes grow heavier, you understand. Invisibility was never about disappearing from others. It's about giving yourself permission to slip away, to rest without worry, to fade gently into sleep. So let the story settle. Let the echoes of experiments, soldiers, and ghostly cloaks drift into silence. The night is here for you, holding you softly, unseen, but safe. Sweet dreams.